Good morning. This is the Talk Shop. I'm Eric Henderson today with in Studio 255 guest at the Laramie Plains Civic Center, Ann Brand, Executive Director for the Albany County Conservancy. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning.
And you agreed on short notice to be a return guest here, following the Albany County Public Information Meeting, number 1 of 3, from our Albany County Assessor, Chelsea Matthews, our Albany County Clerk, Kayla White, and our Albany County Treasurer, Fletcher, and Tracy Fletcher.
Yeah.
And now, the reason for my call was one of the important impacts from the 2025 tax revenue stream reported was that wind was going to be taxed and was widely seen in the room this week at the Albany County Fairgrounds Activity Building as to soften. The revenues would soften some 11% taxes and taxation on wind projects approved in Albany County. We're going to, in this case, subsidize and soften the impact of the cuts that we're going to see from 25% on this area or this type of cut. All the summation of cuts that this wind project, wind turbines in Albany County, were going to be seen as that savior.
I don't think the math is correct. I love Laramie. I love living in a small town. I love Wyoming because I know those 3 ladies and they're terrific. And I've been in Laramie a long time. But you have to just look south of town to know that isn't up. That money isn't coming in during the property tax cut.
Ground was broke.
They moved some dirt so that they could get federal tax credits. But if you're following the Trump administration, they're talking about cutting tax credits.
In February, there was a site.
And I think that should send a shiver down people's spines because people who deal with wrongly cited wind energy, because this is now like a 30-year conversation with people who have become quite focused that are specialists in this area. They have told me that there are 2 ways to secure your tax credits if you're a developer. If you have the money, enough money for the project, it's a no-brainer. You're going to order your wind turbines, right? Because the IRS is going to say, yeah, that checks the box. You get your tax credits because you bought your wind turbines. But if you followed the conversation in Cowboy State Daily last July in 2 articles, Rail Tie Wind was $1 million short before industrial siting ever approved it in 2021. The reason you didn't hear anything about that is because people like the Conservancy, when I participated as a participating party at industrial siting, that developer was very smart. Their legal team made me sign a non-disclosure agreement, which I think was a big circus. And they can do that because they can say you can't talk finances of a project because it's trade secrets. Like our competitors would know the secret sauce. But that's a very loosey-goosey interpretation because their financials actually are all online because ConnectGen was a spin-off in 2018. So I remember learning this in 2020, just as a normal person. I read about the project. I read the name ConnectGen. I typed in ConnectGen on the computer. It's a Quantum Global Energy Equity. So I typed in Quantum Global Energy Equity. Their website popped up. And I was able to see that ConnectGen was a 1-year financial group, right? It was in Financial Group 7 in 2018. So it opened and, like pension funds from California and all these people who invest, right? They put their money in that fund and then it was just a 1-year fund. So then we all know what happened. I mean, the pandemic happened, a lot of stuff happened. So that money just disappeared, right? And I remember thinking how ironic, and I wasn't the only one. A lot of my members would discuss this, how ironic that they would be in the community posing to be these fat cats. Pardon my Wyoming easy breezy approach, but I'm a photographer, so I don't get really bogged down in this. So it gets to, we were able to talk about finances openly during that industrial siting council approve the project or don't approve the project meeting in May of 2021 because it was all online. So that was, if you followed Railtie, it's very interesting. People always say industrial siting never denies a project, which is pretty true. And they very seldom have a special condition, but Railtie had like 7 special conditions. I think that should put alarm up for everybody. But one of them was financial adequacy. So even though the general public had to leave because they didn't have a notary public, stamp thing that said they could sit and listen in on the fact that ConnectGen was $1 million short, there was a financial adequacy request from industrial siting to them. And that deadline was last year. And if you followed that, or the previous year, 2023, November of 2023, and that's what the 2 articles in Cowboy State Daily were. So I, as a participating party, never got notification that ConnectGen by 2023 then supposedly produced their financials and that industrial siting said they checked the box. That actually was mishandled. Industrial siting never should have done that because legally I should have been invited in on that conversation because I participated as a nonprofit representing my members. And so I should have been given the financials that now Repsol supposedly gave industrial siting, and I should be able to go. Well, no, the closed door, this happens in Wyoming all the time. It gets to how we're not used to this, we're not good at this. Staff attorneys, figure out later that this was incorrect when people threatened lawsuit, which I did not do. There were other participating parties, and so there was a group of property owners negatively impacted by Railtie. They live in a homeowner association. A lot of us do in Laramie. And they said, we weren't there. So how could you check that financial adequacy box without us being there? Because all that Repsol did was hand in ConnectGen's financials. Because they're new owner. They have no financials. So they didn't give anything to industrial siting that they never gave them in 2021. And what's worse is that they did not give a letter of intent. They didn't even say, we're so excited. We're telling the state of Wyoming, we're ready to roll on this thing and we're going to put it up. They said, well, we have another wind project in Wyoming. They didn't even say we're excited to build. So people felt really insecure about that. And that's what those 2 articles in Cowboy State Daily are. Their reporter actually went, so because this got caught, because that group of property owners, their attorney, went to industrial siting, then they did have they discussed it openly during the Industrial Siting Council regularly scheduled meeting in Laramie. And that, I think, was on July 9th of last year. And so then an article came out the next day about that. But what I'm getting to is it's interesting that the county or people at that meeting pointed out that that's going to make up for this. That's going to be a Band-Aid for this shortfall in funding. Is I say to you, how can that happen when that isn't up? Is that going to be up in a year? I filed a federal lawsuit against that. And as we can see in the current financial environment, because Trump, in his first day in office, when he was inaugurated, enacted his first executive order. And that executive order stated clearly he was halting all offshore and onshore wind projects. I don't see what's confusing about that. I know that was for new projects, but obviously that's affecting the financial
Because we haven't seen the turbines start.
Yeah. I filed my petition. I have a federal docket number. And a lot of people in Wyoming don't understand this. People who have conservation groups and other things. People in Wyoming, you know, the nonprofits that are conservation groups. I'm a preservationist, but what they do is they typically team up because nonprofits are always, you know, resources are always in question, right? We're trying to do a lot with the resources we have. They'll team up and litigate. So we've seen, you know, like Wyoming Outdoor Council and the Powder River Resource Council will litigate the coal-fed power plant together, right? But I say to you, what I'm noticing is I haven't really seen a nonprofit really dig in environmentally and defend wildlife habitat and historic site degradation proactively.
We're always behind in Wyoming, aren't we?
Southeast Wyoming. This gets very specific in the Laramie and Shirley Basin ecosystems. And you know that Shirley Basin is some of the last quality intact grassland in the world. And so I find it very interesting we haven't done that. It gets to how a mission of a nonprofit can be a 50-year-old mission, right? So you don't just change your mission. I'm never going to change my mission to preserve, protect, and promote habitat, history, and wildlife. And a specific focus of my organization is golden eagle preservation. And that's not going to change. So, of course, we never had an organization that specifically looked at golden eagle habitat. And we have the highest concentration here. So I just am saying people don't follow how the National Environmental Protection Act process goes, not even attorneys, which is interesting to me because it's a 6-page law. And more specifically, I'm not suing the developer. I am litigating the federal government. I'm litigating them because they violated their own law. And so my petition has 68 pages of how they violated laws. So I'm not litigating ConnectGen, which is owned by Repsol in Spain. But they can file to be an intervener, is why I'm having this long conversation with you. And so, of course, they do, because they say, well, you know, the federal government doesn't understand. This is costing us money. This is holding us up. And this isn't in our better interest. And we need to get this project up. And we handled the Federal National Environmental Policy Act. So we would like to speak on our own behalf. So they filed a request to be an intervener, and it's just in limbo. They haven't been granted intervener status. And my law firm said, well, you know, this could be a quirk. A lot of stuff's happening right now, so maybe it is a quirk. Maybe it isn't a quirk. Right? Why? Why are we in limbo land? I don't know, but even if they're granted intervener status, my organization is not going to walk away. We're going to litigate. And so, you know, I don't see turbines being hauled out south of town right now. There's a lot of money. A turbine costs like $1 million. So I think you're going to see that they just moved dirt. That's the cheapest way to secure their federal tax credit. They were only out there 5 days. The week we filed on December 23rd, they went around and moved dirt on a leasee's land, right by public land, which is why people should care. If you like to hunt, they did it right by where people go hunting, right out by Sportsman's Lake Road, right by BLM land, right? If you like to bird watch, if you like historic sites, there are petroglyphs out there from 1500. If you like to take pictures, if you like to paint, I mean, that's your land, right? Because they were literally a foot from BLM land. That's how ridiculous this gets. So I say, I don't know that it's economically feasible to think that the biggest wind project to date in Albany County is going to compensate. I think that's wishful thinking right now because articles are coming out every day. I just had somebody in Australia send me this article about the economics of wind, and why you should care is in the article. Do they talk about onshore anywhere? They only talk about 2 states in the onshore zone on this. And who are they talking about? Wyoming and Texas. Which I find doubly ironic because, I talk to people all the time and they'll say to me, I drove through West Texas when I took my kid to school, and it's horrific. Every inch of that place is a wind turbine. I hate to tell you this, Wyoming, but every inch of Wyoming, if we keep believing this stuff, is going to be a wind turbine. I recently did a map because I'm tired of the confusion. I had help doing the map, and it pointed out we have 42 wind projects here in Wyoming. And these aren't small. They're not like other states, 20 turbines here, 20 there. We just had our governor approve another 900 wind turbines. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of wind turbines already, people. If we want what, well, they're approved with FAA. Right? So a lot of them are up and rotational. A lot of them are on board. I'm that person when I'm driving from Vitavue home from a hike and I see a semi hauling a wind turbine, it makes me nauseous because I know what it's doing to eagles. So I pull off. I just pulled off at Blair Wallace, a week ago to take pictures and post, because I think people go about their daily business and they're like, thank heavens that's not in my backyard. I have news for you. If you looked at the map that I did, which all you have to do is reach out to Albany County Conservancy to get the map, you would realize that wind projects, industrial, that can go from pumped storage to wind turbines to transmission lines to substations to the gateway transmission lines, right? We are talking it will build solid from Seminole all the way to Laramie. Those are all approved, right? But we don't see them coming up because there's no good communication. The developers don't want you to know what's going on. So they are obligated to put up their own website. If you look at their website, you can't figure out a timeline because, this is financially driven. They're opportunists and I can't blame them. So, that's flexible. They can change that, or it doesn't always follow a straight line. It's not like when you have to register your vehicle at the DMV or whatever. I mean, it's not that clean cut. So it's really hard for everybody to follow, whether you're a county commissioner or you're me, right? But if you look deep enough, which means it takes more than 5 or 10 minutes. Quantum literally only took me 5 to 10 minutes to look up. But so I think we want to have the Band-Aid, we want to feel good, but that project, until it's up, I don't know that we get that money. That's what I don't understand.
What's the impact to tourism, Wyoming's number 2 revenue generating area for the state, or one of our
I think it
greatest
depends
assets?
on the tourist, but I think so. That was a topic of conversation clear back in 2021 at that industrial siting council hearing. The Conservancy discussed historic sites and wildlife impacts, right? But the other participating party definitely had people within that group that were witnesses. And they talked about, one of them's an elk outfitter. So they had a document that they produce annually or every 2 years. They hire an outside consulting firm and they want to show how much income elk outfitting brings to the state of Wyoming. And it's immense. It is so immense. And those people spend a lot of money in the state because they really value the quality elk hunting that they can do here. And they will stay typically for a longer duration of time. They will have nicer accommodations. They will, they do a lot for our local economies. And it talked about how wind turbines and elk outfitting don't go well together. Wind turbines, elk hate them. They absolutely hate them. So the elk super herd, which is really bad for their health. And so you're not only impacting, who wants to hunt with 600 to 875 foot wind turbines? That's the height of the Eiffel Tower. There are wind projects out on Wheatland Reservoir 3 where people fish, and they're now starting to catch on. They will tell me, oh, we went fishing and it's horrific what we saw. So obviously they're not too big on the fishing anymore there, are they?
Well,
but it gets to the elk hate them, but then we're also degrading their health. So when you look at chronic wasting, right, and deer, we have a lot of hunting areas in the state that people talk about, traditionally, like Pinedale, that's been a zone to hunt, right? But there are really high rates of chronic wasting disease in deer. Well, what's special and unique is there are areas in southeast Wyoming where our deer are thriving. Our elk, there are pockets of chronic wasting, and then there are lower pockets of chronic wasting. The rate is lower. So, obviously we can't hunt. Game and fish can't, have us hunt when wildlife is not healthy. We saw that in the Serengeti, right? In Africa, no one cared about wildlife, right? There was no incentive to care. So they were cutting off horns and, selling them on the black market. They were annihilating their phenomenal wildlife until what? Until you could go on safari, until they protected their wildlife. And there's a lot of controversy about that because now lions, right? The Lion King, I have kids, but now lions are everybody's killing them. Why? Because they kill big game. There's big money in big game. And so they don't want the lions. Oh, my heart breaks when I hear this because it would be nice to have some lions on the planet, right? So I'm that mom. But so think about Wyoming. Think about our identity. I am a photographer. I love getting the Game and Fish publication, the photos in that, the photo contests, the wildlife photography are stunning. I have huge issues with the fact that we want to hang our cowboy hat on that nail. We want to say that wind's going to help us financially. It's hurting us in big ways that we're not even addressing.
What are the economics to the guiding industry alone? What's special about the money that comes in through guides and their work in elk hunts or specific
Well, so that
interests like
guide
that?
pointed out it's dispersed, right? It goes to
It's outside money, though.
It's outside money, and it goes to downtown Laramie, right? What if you go to Ludwig's because you want to have a portrait in Wyoming? What if you go eat at a restaurant downtown like Altitudes, Chop House and Brewery? What if you fell in love with a special gun at Nate Heineke's gunsmith shop? And these are repeat visitors. They don't just do it once. They fall in love with Wyoming. They want to come back again and again and again.
It's a natural pathway to that same or similar experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I just, that's why people belong to my conservancy. They're really concerned. Wyoming's at this very crucial point, and I understand completely as a professional that when you're sitting at a desk and you're looking at financial figures in front of you, you're not really maybe. I've been told that I'm a very broad-based thinker. It bothers people a lot, but you need people like me, just like you need people who are very analytical and fact-driven. But there are a lot of people crunching numbers regarding wind. This article states it, and it's unsustainable. It's even saying for the projects that are up, the first year is the only bump. Because if we're going after the economics of renewable the way we are nationally, that's going to impact everything. Those companies that are constructing, right, their supply chain. And so the article that was sent to me from Australia that talks about the U.S., by the way, talks about turbine manufacturing is tanking. They had 59 facilities they were thinking of bringing on board in the United States, one in Pensacola, Florida, right? Won't go up. They're not going to construct it, won't employ those people. So I don't see how Wyoming then can say, well, that's our financial answer and it's sustainable in year 2 and 3. I don't know that that's the case then.
What's the economic impact on real estate values surrounding Albany County wind turbine areas?
Well, so I think you get in the weeds with that because pro-wind people always say that it's not completely traceable. It could be other factors. But I can tell you that the first year as a conservancy during a pandemic, just the fact that I was concerned about wildlife issues and I went out on a limb and I put up a rhetorical question on 4 billboards. I didn't say pro-wind or anti-wind. I said why wind, W-Y wind, because I just figure people drive too fast to read anything else. And from that, I mean, I got members and I raised $120,000 in like 9 months on the phone. People cared. And a lot of those people aren't around anymore. You know, they sold. And that also bristles my hair because Wyoming's a buyer beware state. Didn't know this, but right. You really get to know your neighbors when you know the ones that are really honest and they say, you know, I can't sell my property because I can't not tell the prospective buyer, hey, you're going to have a wind turbine on 3 sides of your house. Right? So that person's still here. But obviously quite a few people, their real estate company or whatever, just didn't say anything. They said, look at the view. Look at the antelope out in the meadow, right? I was like, oh my gosh.
How often do you do senior pictures, Ann? Annually, you do senior pictures in photography, right?
I used to say that, but then there are those kids, you know, that their aunt is a great photographer, but you know, they just didn't turn out the way a portrait artist's photos turn out or whatever. So I get these
that
seniors.
aside, here's my question.
Yeah.
How many seniors ask to have their photos
they all
done?
want them out in nature.
How many ask to have them done under a turbine or with a turbine in the background?
Never. And people get real. Once Railtie goes up, because I'm constantly at Vitavue, I ask all my moms, all my graduates, you know, where are you happiest? I might get 1 kid or 2 kids a year annually who say, I don't want to go out in the country. I just want to be downtown. Like, I'll get that kid, but most of them say both. I love downtown, but man, I'm a nature person. I mean, think about it.
At the core of
why
people.
do we all live in Laramie? Is it because we like, you know...
We're rooted in Wyoming.
Urbanization? No. Yeah, we're rooted in Wyoming. So a lot of the families I photograph, all of them, we love outdoors. Now, I get it. We have busy lives. A lot of the kids I photograph are very good athletes or very good, you know, at certain things. And they're busy people. Their parents are busy people. But you know what? Think about Laramie. Just getting in your car in the morning and hearing birds, seeing a fox in the meadow, seeing a baby pronghorn this time of year melts my heart on contact. They're beautiful, right? And that's also, that breaks my heart, right? Because pronghorn hate wind. What's happening in north of Laramie is desecrating their environment entirely. And think about it, moms. So there was a study on mule deer, right, that said that once a wind project goes up, once a wind turbine is erected, that migratory path is broken forever, generationally, because a mother will not bring her young through that pathway. So then think about these wind companies. They tell my commissioners, they tell my industrial siting, oh, you know, the duration of the project's 30 years. Once it comes down, that'll all start up again. Really? They haven't been migrating there for 30 years. They're not coming back. Why would you put your child in front of a semi-truck? You don't do that, right? Why would you bring your fawn through an area filled with 675-foot turbines that blink, hum, and swish. You wouldn't do that, and have
Protect your
shadow
young.
flicker. My goodness gracious. And you do. I also heard that during public meetings. And a lot of times it was paid for endorsement because it's a leasee, right? But they'd say, oh, during a hailstorm, the pronghorn shelter behind the wind turbine. No, you see like a handful of really desperate looking animals who obviously were caught where they didn't want to be. And, they look traumatized. I mean, sure, if it's death or that, go for it. But I think it's not a desired location to be. Do you want to be right next to a wind turbine? Do you want your house next to one? I'm sure if it were survival or your land was right next to a wind project and you had no choice. There's a woman who'll have 3 turbines, that surround her home, and she's not a leasee with Railtie, right? No choice. And that woman is so honest, she's not going to try to sell, right? She has no choice. Then she's going to live surrounded by that. But does she want to?
What
No.
does the state or federal government value one eagle at?
Well, so
If one is lost,
you can look up the fine, but if you don't report a dead eagle, because I just had someone come into the studio who wants portraits, and they had a dead eagle that they found on their property that they knew was nesting because they love watching the eagles. It was a bald eagle, actually, and it had a band on it. And they think it got hit by a vehicle because this was by Sheep Mountain, right? So their only mistake is they didn't call Fish and Wildlife in Denver because that's a federal violation. It's a federal law. In the United States, you can't just not report a dead eagle. We're violating it in Wyoming right and left. If you kill an eagle and you don't report it and you get caught, you'll be put in federal prison or you face, I believe, a $50,000 fine instantly, right? But you're probably going to show up in court and have to have that conversation. But they contacted Game and Fish. And here's where it gets interesting. Game and Fish didn't really care. Well, that doesn't surprise me because it's not a state law. But if they, as a citizen, knew they had to report that eagle, I'm sure that a biologist with Game and Fish knew that they probably should have called FWS, is where I'm going with that. But obviously, whoever was on the phone with them did not tell them that. But they did assure them that they would go out and they would get the eagle. And then years elapsed. And so I think it's pretty safe to say now that they're not coming to get the eagle, which is why they were having the conversation with me. And this couple is really interesting. And this is the charm of Wyoming, really smart people, right? But so they looked at the band on the eagle's leg. First, we had the conversation because I work with a biologist, but he doesn't band eagles. He puts a tracking device on them. So it's a little bit different. So they looked at the information on the band, and that eagle was reintroduced in the wild as part of a rescue program. So that eagle died from its second human-caused impact, right? Which is heart-wrenching. What's even more heart-wrenching is that probably donor money and, maybe even financial funding and all sorts of things went into helping that eagle recover and be reintroduced. And it flew all the way from Maryland. It was released in Maryland.
who fights for eagles in America?
The Albany County Conservancy.
And how do you find more information about the Albany County Conservancy? And
albanycountyconservancy.org. And I have Ludwig Photography. If you're more a people person and you want to pick up a brochure and a card and have a face to a name, which is what Wyoming's about, then just stop by Ludwig Photography across from First Interstate Bank. And I have big partners. I communicate clearly all the time. I'm always advocating, as are my members, as is the biologist that I work with. Because education's key, because people don't realize the heaviest concentration of migratory eagles and local eagles on the continent, the highest activity level. Wyoming's a hotbed in and of itself, the whole state, amazing. But within that, the Laramie and Shirley Basin is it, folks. I mean, it's amazing. And so you got to think broad. People think of the Laramie and Shirley Basin. I don't think they think broad enough. People don't say, hey, I live, at Sheep Mountain. I'm part of that. But this couple did, right? But that eagle, what is so amazing to me is that eagle instinctively wound up in Wyoming. Hardwired, right? And then discovered a nest. Eagles have been nesting here for thousands of years. So that is a differing opinion. There are groups like the Teton Raptor Center, and there's good science talking about introducing metal nesting zones. I'm using the wrong term, right? In the Theodore Roosevelt grassland that maybe an eagle will claim. And I say to you, why? Why would the eagle claim that? That would be a last case resort. I mean, they obviously like the nests they've been using for thousands of years. It's instinctive. So when you put a turbine by a nest like that, it's disastrous. We have projects approved, Two Rivers Wind, 4 miles north of Medicine Bow. Lucky Star Wind is now going to be up for public comment, which is why you should care. You should make your comments. It'll probably come out around the end of May or June 5th because everything's late. Think about this because of the executive order. So I don't know that wind's going to be giving us good money. Everything's delayed, right? And so whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, if you love wildlife, whether you love or hate this administration, ask yourself, what is one positive thing that could come out of this administration in regards to wildlife? Because not very many positive things are coming out right now, right? We're going to get rid of the National Environmental Policy Act. We're going to fast track industrial development. We're going to build houses on public land, right? All this stuff's coming out, but I think that the executive wind order is a blessing for Wyoming because we haven't come to terms with this. We're an energy state and we're exploited constantly. And, it's good economics for a state when we're looking at oil, gas, and coal. Whether you love or hate them, whether you consider them disastrous or environmentally sound, they've paid for our schools. I have the economics about wind and public school funding, and they're miserable. And that's why the State Land Commission, the first round discussing whether they should lease state land to Railtie or not, voted it down, is that there was a member of my conservancy that talked about the bad economics and what a poor return on investment it was. Second round, when they rescinded and then discussed it again, Treasurer Meyer voted it down. And it's because he, again, was reminded of the bad economics because in the chat, in that Zoom, because it was during the pandemic, that same member put it all up for everybody else to read, hundreds of people. So, it didn't look too good. So, and I find it interesting that just recently in Cowboy State Daily, when Chuck Gray called out Gordon for approving 2 more wind projects behind closed doors during a land commission meeting, in that article, Chuck, about that, with Chuck getting frustrated that it was behind closed doors, I was livid with Secretary Meyer, right? Because he said, well, wind projects, once they go up, people get used to them. I don't hear any complaints about Arlington. And I thought to myself, oh, how quickly we forget. How can he forget 12 contentious hours of negative comments between the 2 land commission meetings about Railtie Wind? It's not Arlington. It's south of Arlington, but that's ridiculous.
Misinformation.
Well, no, I think humans are adaptive. 5 years ago is long ago. We just move on. But I'd like to remind them that's not the case. That is not the case. People spoke 6 hours at each meeting, right? The total time allotted. And it was, we don't want this, right? So, it's not good funding. I get that we have to find something in the short term, but really go talk to your legislature. Of all the things they should have discussed this legislative session, yes, many people are relieved they talked about property tax relief. Okay? But if you followed that, Cale Case introduced legislation to kill the moratorium on taxation of wind and solar. He does that every time. And he didn't pause to invite anybody from Albany County, Carbon County, to talk. He let the lobbyists from the wind energy sector do that. They camp out in Cheyenne the whole 2 months that the legislature's there. I mean, they're just right there. So, I mean, the legislative representatives have to pick up on this. I really feel, honestly, we have a tremendous opportunity as a state to come together and say we have enough wind energy generation. We are not, look in downtown Laramie, look at the number of empty storefronts, right? So we can talk all day about why those storefronts are empty. We can say it's a retirement, right? But I tell you, if that business were thriving, if there were people in that business purchasing, that there'd be a new owner lined up to take over that business under the same name, that would not be an empty storefront. Or that owner may say, oh, I might wait a couple years to retire. I mean, it's been fun. But Laramie's hurting. It is. Sales and use tax. If your city, right, and you meet with our commissioners and you talk about the positive sales and use tax income you're getting, think how insecure you're feeling right now when you see that all those storefronts downtown are empty in Albany County. Where's that sales and use tax? It's not there, right? So we have to really sit down and talk about how to invigorate our local economy. And I'm sorry, I don't think that 5 full-time jobs at a wind site are going to cut it.
They're man camps, as we do not get long-term
Drive
jobs.
out to Rock River. It's not a big place. And you'll see that, some guy decided to make hay while he could. And so his way of generating income was to say, you can camp your trailer in my front yard. His neighbors do not like that at all. And so I'm sure it gave him a bump while they're building, right? Rock Creek Wind, right? Because there's 3 phases to that. But that too will pass. And so owning a business in downtown Laramie for the past now almost 40 years of my life, and then my family owning it for like 100 before that. This year's the building's 100th anniversary. I haven't even had time to think about that yet or have a big party, but I'm going to do something really fun, especially when they finish Ivinson. They're almost ready to move the street barricades, but
is that a thrill?
Yeah, to have them remove that, yeah. I pull U-turns in front of the day and night teller at the bank, right? I shouldn't admit this. Nobody heard that. So I'm excited for my street to open up again. But then everybody from Grand is just going to move over to me, right? Because that's what we got to deal with. But I say all the time, I notice things, right? So what have I noticed the past 3 years? I've noticed them take down our street lights on Grand Avenue, and I've noticed a backup of traffic when I went to go get coffee at Coal Creek over by the Hilton, right? Why? They're hauling turbines all the way from Texas. Boy, that's really environmentally sound, folks. Right? Nobody seemed inconvenienced. It's summer day. I was inconvenienced. I was supposed to be at the studio for a portrait consultation. Like, I didn't want to be stuck behind that thing. They literally, and they didn't have local people take down the wiring on the lights. It was like the whole thing came from Texas or wherever. It was a big production. Like, the trucks came in, took down the wiring because the turbine was too big. No one else around me seemed to pay attention. I took pictures of them parked at the Lincoln Monument. That was an ugly sight, right? Just yucky anti-tourist stuff. And so you say, how's it going to hurt tourism? Well, maybe it won't. Maybe you're that tourist. Maybe you just want to drive to Wyoming and shoot coyotes and, drive your monster diesel truck with your Dixie flag or whatever. But most people come to Wyoming because they want to see petroglyphs. They want to go rock climbing. They want to go fishing. They want to go up to the Snowy Mountain Range. They want to see a moose. That's the core of our tourism, right? They don't want to just shoot everything in sight, whether it's in season, out of season, or as human, right? They're the other kind of tourist. They're the kind of people that live in town. They value those things. And I think we need to really talk about that.
We're visiting with Ann Brand, Executive Director for the Albany County Conservancy right here in Laramie. You can find more information at albanycountyconservancy.org. And we thank you for your time today on the Talk Shop.